Welcome, everyone, to the Cybberssecurity Podcast. It's a cybersecurity podcast with a little extra BS. I'm Andrew Nuxoll.
And I'm Nathanael Dick. And today we're going to talk about a few different topics. And we'll start with a tie into the last episode, which was compliance and the consequences of non-compliance. We talked last time about trying to be compliant with the new NIST and CMMC requirements. And we recently had an example where the Department of Justice actually went after a university in this case because they were not compliant, or they were falsely stating they were compliant with CMMC or NIST 800-171 compliance.
Yeah, so Georgia Tech is kind of in the news as part of this. Again, like Nathaniel said, Department of Defense, Department of Justice, both after them. And one of the things it really outlines is when it comes to compliance, not every individual aspect can be tested. Part of it is just, working with a business or the government is trusting in their vendors that the information they're providing and the statements that they're making are accurate. Of course, they'll have an assessor of some sort, a tester come in to audit their environment, but they can't test every individual aspect. So they do samples and check on things, and to the best of their ability will confirm whether or not an entity is compliant. And in this case, it seems like there's a lot of misleading statements, to your point, Nathaniel. I can't confirm this, obviously, but some of the things that were mentioned, among them, patching wasn't taking place regularly. There wasn't effective antivirus or EDR we're talking about. There were a number of different just misleading statements, if not untruthful.
Yeah, it seems like, too, there was a lot of leeway by the federal government to deploy plans of actions to become compliant. So they really got ahead of themselves by marking everything as compliant. There was really no need to. They actually could disclose to the government they were not compliant with certain items in the framework, but they chose to mark everything or a lot of them as compliant when they were specifically not. And I think that's what the whistleblower was pointing out in their statements, is that even though that they were compliant, they just willfully marked as compliant and misled the government.
Yeah, and I think those that haven't been involved in an audit or required to provide evidence or sit through any of the discussions, read an attestation following an audit, may not understand that depending upon how thorough an auditor is or a program is, it can be quite difficult to achieve every single documented bullet point, every single initiative, every task that's set out. And it's unlikely that any organization gets 100%. The auditors are there to help find things to improve processes. Obviously, you want to be doing well and putting forth effort, but if they find something, generally speaking, that isn't cause for a contract to be immediately terminated or anything like that. Sometimes it just means additional evidence needs to be provided, or they'll give the opportunity to make some changes and improve the way that things were done before, to close the gaps that were identified, and so on. But it seems like, they were just lying through their teeth on, according to the lawsuit, on some of the things that they were doing. Like you said, whistleblowers came forward and turned them in. So it'll be really interesting to see how this moves forward.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we're going to start to see more and more of that. There was a University of Pennsylvania case last year, I believe, and regarding similar whistleblower complaint with NIST compliance. So kind of just a evaluation of what we're seeing is continued enforcement by the Department of Justice of all these policies. So I think, too, it kind of, we've been talking a lot about it, and it kind of talk about the BS we're trying to break through in cybersecurity is don't have to cover it up. Just say what you're doing and you can break through some of that BS and just be honest with what you're doing as a company and portray to your stakeholders. This is where we're at. These are our risks. And that helps a lot. The honesty piece is, I think, missing in a lot of these larger corporations when we've seen some of these data breaches. It hasn't been very transparent, and it's led to a lot of questions by us and others. How are these systems and platforms being protected?
Yeah, the transparency and integrity just so important when it comes to things like this. I have one really big breach among many breaches that has come to light since our last episode, and that was in conjunction with National Public Data, and they do background checks, and apparently they're in a treasure trove of social security numbers taken from them, numbering in the tens of millions, it's sounding like. So very likely that anybody that's done anything, where they put their social security number out there for a background check, whether it was for a credit application, a job, background check, a number of different things. National Public Data is a huge player in that space and likely has that information. And it's an open can of worms, and they're everywhere now.
Yeah, it's interesting interesting too. It seems like it was a third party that was potentially compromised, and this is how that data got leaked out there. I haven't found a whole lot of information, maybe you know, Andrew, but what exactly the specific details led to this? It seems like a little mixed opinion about how this data actually got out there. But again, just a large amount of data, and this time social security numbers, not even like the AT&T breach we talked about earlier this year, which is phone numbers and some not really sensitive information. This time it was some pretty sensitive information.
Yeah, it's all rumor, so I hate to say
Yeah.
it. It sounds like there was a database of information that included the social security numbers that just had no security whatsoever on it. It was pretty much wide
really?
open. And someone gained access to the system and found this unencrypted data and just made a copy of it. Yeah, and it's another example of this was probably based upon the rumors. I can't say for certain, but probably based upon a misconfiguration coupled with human error. And it goes back to what we talk about almost every time we get together. Human element is so hard to protect against. Mistakes are always made. You can have every tool you want, and it's likely not going to be enough if you don't have a well-trained and aware user base.
Definitely. And it even comes down to the IT staff. Like you said, misconfiguration, one of those pieces that can lead to a lot of these very large breaches. We've definitely seen that with several different breaches over the last year. Think back last year when we started, we had the MGM hack, and that was related to an IT worker being compromised. So I think a lot of these breaches, especially the larger ones, are kind of on the laps of system administrators, security people like us. And I think, I think there's a lot of blame that has to go just for basic configuration / IT being more aware of some of these threats.
Yeah, it's definitely not just your general end user that's doing data processing. They obviously are a risk as well. But we're, to your point, seeing increasing reports of voice spoofing or simulation, phishing, and especially social engineering of to the technical support staff. That's become a vector that has come up in the past few months numerous times. Someone calling the help desk, pretending that they're with a tech support agency, whether it be an identity management or some other. Oh, hey, I just need you to reset my password. Oh, my account's missing. Well, that's the problem. Just recreate my account. Someone that doesn't know what's going on, and all of a sudden they've created a new, what appears to be authorized account, a brand new password, given it to the person, and away they get pieces.
We hear a lot about zero trust. I think it's kind of like the AI. Maybe a couple years ago, everybody was saying zero trust, and we have this platform and it provides zero trust, and this platform provides zero trust. So just kind of a little bit of a background about what is zero trust. So an example might be when you log on to your computer and you're on a corporate network, you're still prompted for multi-factor authentication when you access your mail accounts. This is a simple example. You're not just trusted based on the network you're a part of. You're always verified. And that's just a very simple example. There's more complex examples, but I think
to that, if I can, Nathaniel. So if someone isn't like in the corporate world and seeing this, an example that you may see where at least a level of zero trust has been implemented is you log on to a website every day from your computer and you're looking at it, and then you decide, I'm going to log on to that same website from my phone or tablet, and you put your password in, and instead of just accepting that, even with two-factor authentication, you may see a message or some additional step of confirmation that says, this appears to be a new browser, and your account's correct, your password's correct, but that's a sign that someone's attempting to use a level of zero trust in the real world, because they're, in the course of verifying all of this information, they verified your username, they verified your password, perhaps multi-factor authentication through an authenticator app or a token or some other method, a text message. And then you might even get one more message that says, we don't recognize the device you're logging in from. We don't recognize this browser. Also check your email and confirm through your email by clicking on the links that that's you. So that's a real world thing that you'll see a lot. It's a sign that somebody's trying some level of zero trust.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. And we probably see that a lot with, especially like bank accounts. They're pretty good at initiating a sign-in verification if it's not like a trusted browser. Thankfully, most bank accounts require two-factor authentication. There are some that don't, but that's a good example. So I think there's a lot of value, and there's different levels, I guess, of zero trust. Always verified. I mean, maybe the extreme approach is continuous verification. So some sort of factor that you're constantly verifying, whether it's some sort of certificate or a continuous access policy that you're consistently verifying the details of the session the entire time it's in use. And then maybe a more simple approach is just verifying, like you said, said, just a browser or sign-in activity, adding an extra step. I think there's a lot of value to that. I've seen it play out in different aspects where it gets so rigorous, it's hard to do anything.
Yeah.
And so like authentication passes from one application to another application, and the user is spending all their time just signing into everything every time they open their computer. And then on the other side, I think there's a lot of value because you see maybe a cookie session could be hijacked or a man-in-the-middle attack can occur, and that can help eliminate some of those base attacks. So
yeah, I mean, in theory, it's great, but in reality, I would go so far as to say I hate using absolutes, but zero trust really is a theory. It's a destination that's extremely difficult for an organization to reach and fully implement. It's extremely expensive. You have to have all your tools being compatible with this type of framework. Takes a lot of integration being built between your different respective applications so that they work in this fashion. It's great if you can do it and you have the staff that can make it happen and the man hours and so on. By all means, it's great, but there are a lot of drawbacks and a lot of pitfalls with it. Also, the cost, the complexity, and quite honestly, you touched on it. You end up in many cases, if it isn't tuned well, you end up authenticating so often or verifying you're authenticated so often that it really diminishes productivity. So if you're actively working and you could be in the middle of something, and if it's not tuned properly, not set up well, you can be in the middle of work and have pause because you're getting a message that your session has timed out or there's some sort of hoop you have to jump through to verify that you're still working. So
there's definitely a balance like everything in security. I think, like you mentioned, the architecture, the framework, the idea around zero trust is definitely something notable to think about in the security world. What level you take to apply that to an organization to verify your authentication. I think always verification always trust without any type of verification would be a bad place to be. But what level of verification you have is kind of probably based on maybe the user risk, and then maybe based on the type of device. Are they signing in from a work device versus maybe a web browser, depending on what application, whatever company it might change, I think. So I think it's something just to evaluate. What is the risk here? What is the type of resource you're activating? I think if we're a high risk, critical resource, upping that zero trust thermometer is important. And then maybe a lower level resource that really is not going to give a lot of access, maybe turning that down a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. So what do you think what do you think drove the real push to move towards zero trust? Why? It's not necessarily a new thing. It's to some it's been around for a few years. People have been pushing it. I would say maybe going back 5 years. Companies are pushing it. What do you think the real driver to move to zero trust is?
I think people got scared with all the social engineering attacks, and they just saw we can never trust anyone. And so I think that's why a lot of the marketers started to use it a lot, because it was back in the 90s, I think researcher proposed it, but it started to have more relevance as we, first of all, started using the cloud more, have all these connected applications. You just sign in and you get access to everything. Before, we had all these on-premise accounts, so we really didn't even you really couldn't even sign in remotely. I mean, now you have more remote workers too, I think. Just a kind of combination of things. And I think we started to see, especially social engineering got really good, and largely is still really good, unfortunately, at their attacks. And people like me and you probably got a little bit scared and said, what can we do to stop this? And I don't know, what do you think?
I think that you touched on the big things that popped to mind. It's really twofold. First is cloud adoption and having workloads and applications and so on that aren't within your own direct network in some cases, and trying to find a way to secure against that. Second is the remote work paradigm and what goes along with people working remotely, using their own devices to log in things. Because traditionally, the way that the security worked was it was all perimeter based, so meaning that there'd be a network set up, and as long as you were inside that network operating, you were, for lack of a better term, inherently trusted. If you made it in, you were good.
Right.
And if you were outside of it, well, then you couldn't do anything. And in order to meet the needs of changing workforce, and this goes back before the pandemic, this is something that came about because of COVID. I think it escalated it and caused it to be more rapidly pursued and adopted by some organizations. But as more and more remote work was being done, more and more people were traveling. There were people that just couldn't effectively work within a network, and the complexities of allowing them to work. It doesn't seem so hard to set up a VPN and log into a network and so on. But you combine that with all of the other security requirements and the needs to log on in a potentially unsafe or unsecured network and public area and so on. You're layering so many potential risks. I think you touched on it, that a lot of security professionals were like, this has to happen. The business is demanding it. We have to find a way to control it. We have to find a way to secure. And I won't say it was panic, but it was a bit of an overreaction maybe to the way things were working. If things had been architected securely from the beginning, it probably would have made it a lot better. But that isn't always easy or practical when you're working with so many different applications from so many different vendors and people accessing them in different ways, different locations, and all the intricacies that go with that.
And I think kind of cut through the BS of zero trust too is a lot of people or a lot of marketers will include it as, hey, we have zero trust. It's not really, like you mentioned, a technology. It's just an architecture. So I think a lot of ways to think about it is to look at an application and say, okay, how does that fit into your overall architecture and security adoption? And will it help enable us to maybe make some zero trust decisions or have more verification and control over a sign-in process or a whatever that may be process to make sure your sign-ins are verified or something like that. So I think just how it's marketed, maybe it's kind of like the AI. Everything's AI. All these security tools are now AI driven. Well, it's kind of the same concept. There's a lot of promises, but it just fits into an overall picture. How does this fit into your security tool set, and how can we evaluate that based on the same principles we've been using for years? Really hasn't changed. We have to really fight a little bit harder now that hackers have gotten a lot more sophisticated.
Agreed. Right. It was great catching up.
Definitely.
Some interesting topics to discuss next time. While we're on the topic, I think that's a good stopping point. Daniel, thanks as always.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Andrew, and stay cyber safe out there, everybody.